I wanted freedom like any self-respecting Texan should. That's what I tell folks when they ask why I'm out here, nursing my 6th glass of synthetic whiskey in this dimly lit corner of Craxton 9's seediest establishment. The Vexillion bartender keeps the drinks coming, even though we both know my credit chip's running about as low as my power armor's quantum reserves. You look like you've got questions, I drawl to the young alien behind the bar, watching him polish a glass with 3 of his forearms. These rim-world bartenders, they've seen everything twice and heard it all 3 times, but something about my armor always gets their attention. Go ahead and ask. Everyone does eventually. The quantum spurs on my boots hum weakly as I adjust my position, the sound nowhere near the proud song they used to sing. 10 years out here in the rim worlds will do that to even the finest Texas engineering. Hell, the whole suit's been running on prayers and patch jobs for the better part of 2 years now. They just don't make things like they used to back when every piece of night equipment was handcrafted by artisans who'd spent generations perfecting their craft. Your armor, the Vexillion finally speaks, setting down the glass. It bears the mark of the Texas Knights. I've heard stories, the stories say a lot of things. I interrupt, running a gauntleted hand over the faded Lone Star emblem on my chest plate. The quantum-enhanced paint used to shift colors in starlight, a subtle reminder that the eyes of Texas were always watching. Now it's just a dull gray, like everything else out here on the rim. Some of them are even true. The armor's environmental seals groan in protest as I lean forward. There's a hole in the atmospheric recycler that makes the whole suit smell like 3-day-old coffee, but I can't bring myself to replace it with some mass-produced Commonwealth part. Call it pride or stubbornness or just plain old Texas hard-headedness. You're a long way from home, the Vexillion observes, his voice carrying that careful neutrality that comes from years of not picking sides in bar fights. Haven't seen a knight in these parts for nearly a decade. I can't help but laugh, though it comes out sounding more bitter than I'd like. Son, there ain't been any knights out here because I'm not on any official business. Haven't been for a long time. My quantum spurs sputter slightly as I shift again, leaving only the faintest trace of blue fire against the bar's scuffed floor. Time was, those spurs would light up a room, leave trails that could be seen from orbit. Now they're like everything else about this suit, hanging on by sheer force of will and whatever maintenance I can manage with salvaged parts. The human empire grows, I continue, more to my whiskey than my audience. Spreads across the stars like kudzu back on Earth that was. And with it comes the rules, the regulations, the endless political maneuvering. My fist clenches, the armor's servo motors whining in protest. They wanted us knights to be peacekeepers, bureaucrats with fancy guns and ancient titles. The bartender wipes down the counter with practiced efficiency. So you chose exile. Exile? I bark out another laugh. No, son, I chose freedom. Told them my quantum communicator was damaged beyond repair, that I was lost in some unexplored sector. Said I'd find my way back eventually. I tapped the side of my helmet where the quantum comm unit sits silent. Truth is, it works just fine. I just stopped answering. A commotion near the bar's entrance draws my attention. 3 consortium mercenaries, still wearing their old war colors despite the treaties. They're hassling what looks like a group of colony prospectors, probably trying to shake them down for protection fees. Trouble? The Vexillion asks, his tone suggesting he's already calculating the cost of replacing broken furniture. I stand slowly, the armor's joints protesting every movement. The quantum spurs flicker once, then stabilize, leaving faint trails of blue fire that almost look like they're apologizing for not being brighter. No trouble, I drawl, checking the charge on my quantum pistol. The power cell's running at maybe 60%, and the quantum matrix hasn't been properly aligned in years, but it'll do. Just business. Because out here on the rim, a man's gotta eat. And sometimes I touch the brim of my Stetson, its quantum-enhanced material still maintaining that perfect shadow after all these years. Sometimes that means reminding folks that even a knight who's walked away from Texas still remembers what it means to wear these spurs. The bartender eyes my armor's flickering power readings. Your suit doesn't look like it's up for a fight. I cut him off. Though we both know it's true. The suit's main reactor is running at maybe 40% capacity, and half the quantum field generators are being held together with spot welds and prayers. But some things matter more than equipment status. Because the one thing they don't tell you in all those stories about Texas knights, it ain't the armor that makes the knight. I start walking toward the mercenaries, each step leaving a flickering trail of blue fire that might be dim, might be uneven, but still carries enough of that old Texas warning to make nearby patrons step back. It's the night that makes the armor. And sun. I pause, looking back at the Vexillion. I may have walked away from Texas, but Texas. The quantum spurs flame a little brighter, as if remembering their purpose. Texas never quite walked away from me. The mercenaries are starting to notice my approach. One of them recognizes the armor, even in its worn state. His hand drops to his weapon, and I feel something I haven't felt in a long time, that old Texas smile, the one that comes right before you explain to some folks that they've made a serious miscalculation. Because sometimes a man's gotta eat. And sometimes, just sometimes, dinner comes with a side of reminding the galaxy why even a retired Texas knight is still a force to be reckoned with. Even if his spurs don't shine quite as bright as they used to. Turns out those prospectors weren't just any colonists. They represented a mining operation out on Perdition's Edge, a titanium-rich world that had more sandstorms than breathable air. After I convinced those consortium boys to seek employment elsewhere, amazing how persuasive a quantum pistol can be, even running at 60%, the colonists made me an offer. We need protection. Their leader, Henrietta Case, explained over a glass of what passed for bourbon in these parts. But not from claimed jumpers or raiders. She paused, glancing at my worn armor. We've got bigger problems. I adjusted my Stetson to quantum-enhanced shadow, hiding my expression. Ain't no such thing as bigger problems. Just different sizes of the same old trouble. She pulled out a holo projector, and what I saw made my quantum spurs flare brighter than they had in years. The image showed a squad of troops in powered armor that looked almost like, but no, that wasn't possible. That's knight armor, I said, my voice hardening. Or trying to be. The armor in the holo was wrong in 100 subtle ways. The quantum field generators were exposed, practically begging for a well-placed shot. The spurs looked like cheap imitations, their blue fire more like dying chemical flames than true quantum energy. But the basic design was unmistakable. Former Commonwealth Admiral James Morrison Case explained. He set up shop 3 systems over. Bean raiding colonies, using knockoff night tech to intimidate people into paying protection fees. I took another sip of synthetic bourbon, wishing it was the real thing. Morrison, I muttered. The name brought back memories of committee meetings, of politicians trying to turn the knights into their personal enforcers. Should have known he'd turn up out here eventually. My armor creaked as I stood, the primary power cell dropping another percentage point, just from that simple movement. What's he asking for? 30% of all mineral rights, Case replied, plus administrative fees that keep getting higher. Last month he took half our shipment, said the fees had been adjusted for inflation. I walked to the viewport, watching Perdition's Edge rotate slowly below the station. The sandstorms made patterns like quantum wakes across its surface. And you want me to have a word with him about his business practices? Case's reflection in the viewport showed a grim smile. We want you to shut him down. Permanently. I turned back to face her, and my quantum spurs left trails that were steady for the first time in years. You do realize my armor's barely holding together. That half my weapons are running on jerry-rigged power cells. I gestured at my chest plate, where the Lone Star had faded to barely a shadow. I ain't exactly in fighting shape. But you're still a knight, she said simply. Even out here, she hesitated. Even retired. I finished for her. Even gone rogue, she nodded. The stories say knight technology only works for those worthy of it. That there's more to it than just mechanics and quantum fields. My hand dropped to my quantum pistol, feeling the warm hum of its matrix. The weapon was old, its power cell dying, but there was truth in what she said. Knight technology had always been more than just advanced engineering. How many men does Morrison have? 50, maybe 60, all in that knockoff armor. I laughed, and this time there was real amusement in it. Only 60? Hell, that almost seems fair. I walked back to the table, my spurs leaving intermittent trails of blue fire. But you should know something, Miss Case. I ain't doing this for your colony. She raised an eyebrow. No, I sat down, the armor's joints protesting. I'm doing it because some things are sacred. Because even though I walked away from Texas, there are lines you don't cross. I tapped my chest plate. And pretending to be a knight, using corrupted versions of our technology? The quantum spurs flared bright enough to cast shadows. Well, that's about 3 miles past that line. Your price? She asked. I thought about my credit chip, about the repairs my armor desperately needed. Then I thought about Morrison, about what it meant to disgrace knight technology. Room, board, and enough parts to keep this suit running, I said finally. Plus whatever I can salvage from Morrison's operation. Case blinked. That's considerably less than we were prepared to offer. I stood again, and this time I didn't even wince at the power cells drop. Ms. Case, some things are worth more than credits. Sometimes a man's gotta eat, sure. I touched the brim of my Stetson. But sometimes he's gotta remember who he is, too. As I walked out to prep my gear, I heard her ask one final question. And who are you? I paused in the doorway, my quantum spurs leaving trails that were dim but unwavering. Me? I'm just a knight who got tired of politics. The spurs flared once, bright and true. But I never got tired of doing what's right. The door hissed shut behind me as I headed for my ship. My armor might be held together with prayers and patch jobs, my weapons might be running on borrowed time, but none of that mattered. Because Morrison was about to learn something that every true knight knew in their bones. It ain't the gear that makes you dangerous. It's remembering what that gear stands for. And brother, I might have walked away from Texas, but I never forgot what these spurs mean. Morrison's base sprawled across the northern ridge of Perdition's Edge like a rattler sunning itself on a rock. Through my helmet's cracked viewport, I could see his troops patrolling in their knockoff knight armor. Quantum spurs spitting weak purple flames instead of proper Texas blue. Ain't that just like a politician, I muttered, checking my quantum pistol's charge one last time. Can't even get the color right. My own armor was running on fumes. The main reactor had dropped to 35% during the approach, and the atmospheric seals were fighting a losing battle against Perdition's sandstorms. But as I watched Morrison's men strut around in their counterfeit gear, something old and fierce woke up in my quantum spurs. They blazed blue enough to cut through the storm. I didn't sneak in. Didn't try any fancy tactical approaches. Just walked straight up to their main gate, spurs leaving trails of true Texas fire in the sand. The guards saw me coming from half a mile out, hard to miss the only real knight armor on this dust ball of a planet. That's far enough, one of them called out, his voice crackling through a poor imitation of our quantum comm systems. This is a restricted area. I kept walking. I said stop. He raised his weapon, a plasma rifle trying desperately to look like knight tech. This is your final warning. Son, I drawled, not breaking stride. I've been wearing these spurs longer than you've been breathing. Now, you can step aside and live to regret your career choices, or I let the sentence hang. He fired. The plasma bolt splashed against my armor's quantum field, and something remarkable happened. My suit's power levels, which had been hovering in the red for months, suddenly jumped to 50%. It was like the gear itself remembered what it was made for. Well, I smiled beneath my helmet. Ain't that interesting? What followed wasn't really a fight. These boys had the looks down, the armor, the weapons, even those sad excuses for quantum spurs. But they didn't have the soul of it. Didn't understand that knight technology wasn't just about quantum matrices and power fields. It was about being worthy of it. I walked through their defenses like they were made of paper. My quantum pistol, which hadn't fired straight in 3 years, suddenly couldn't miss. Every shot found a weak point in their knockoff armor. Every blast disrupted their counterfeit quantum fields. My spurs left trails of fire that seemed to seek out their targets like guided missiles. Impossible, one of Morrison's lieutenants gasped as his armor failed around him. Your power levels, your systems are practically antiques. Son, I replied, quantum spurs blazing, you're using stolen songs to play copycat music. I'm wielding an heirloom that knows its true master. I found Morrison in his command center, surrounded by displays showing quantum field calculations that made my teeth hurt. He wore a modified admiral's uniform with knight insignias he hadn't earned. Should have known they'd send someone, he said, not turning around. Though I expected someone more official. Ain't nothing official about this. I told him, my quantum pistol humming with renewed purpose. Just a retired knight who objects to your interior decorating. He spun, fast for a man his age, drawing a weapon that looked almost like a knight's quantum pistol. Almost, you're alone, he smiled. Your armor's outdated. Your weapons are practically scrap. How did you even get past my men? Because they ain't your men, I said simply. They're just boys playing dress-up in clothes they stole. And this? I gestured at my battered armor, my flickering quantum field. This is what real knight tech looks like when it's been rode hard and put away wet. But it still remembers what it means to serve Texas. Texas, he spat. You knights and your mysticism. It's all just technology. Advanced, yes, but still just machines and energy fields. My quantum spurs flared so bright they left shadows on the ceiling. That's always been your problem, Morrison. You think because you can copy the shape of something, you can steal its soul. He fired. His weapon made all the right noises, had all the right parts, but the quantum blast dissipated against my chest plate like a summer rain. My return shot caught him square in the shoulder, the true quantum field disrupting his shields like they weren't even there. "That's not possible," he gasped, staring at his fallen weapon. "Your power levels are just fine," I finished, my armor systems running smoother than they had in years. Because some things remember their purpose no matter how far they wander. I left Morrison alive, sent him and his men packing with a warning that carried more Texas than politics in it. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I activated my quantum communicator. The message was simple: coordinates for Morrison's base, details of his counterfeit operation, and a brief note explaining that while I still wasn't coming home, I hadn't forgotten my duties. Signed it with my old night designation and a postscript that would mean something to the right people. The eyes of Texas are still upon me. And sometimes that's enough. When Case asked why I didn't kill Morrison, I just smiled. Because a knight's job isn't just to fight. It's to remind folks why we fight in the first place. I touched my chest plate, where the Lone Star emblem had somehow regained some of its old luster. And sometimes letting a man live with his shame is a harder punishment than ending him. I didn't stay for the celebration. Got my payment in parts and supplies, enough to keep my armor running for another few years. As I walked back to my ship, spurs leaving steady trails of blue fire, Case called out one last time. "Will you ever go back to Texas?" I thought about it, watching the quantum trails fade in the sand. Maybe someday. When the politics get less swampy or I get more tolerant. I adjusted my Stetson. But for now, out here on the rim, a man can still be free, still choose his own battles. My armor's power levels had settled back to their usual struggling hum, but there was something different about it now, like it had remembered what it was meant to be. And sometimes, I added, climbing into my ship, a man's gotta eat. But every now and then I looked at my quantum communicator, still active after all these years. Every now and then, he's gotta remember what feeds his soul too. The quantum spurs left one last trail of true Texas blue as I lifted off, heading for the next job, the next fight, the next chance to prove that even a knight who walks away from home never really forgets where he came from. Because the eyes of Texas, they ain't just watching. They're reminding you who you are. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave it a like and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Feel free to comment and share it as well. With all that said, go on and check out the video in the top left. I think you might like it.